Today I am going to talk about the final chapter in the book Finding Genuine Practice by Gyalwang Karmapa. And this is about the 8 verses of training the mind. The verses are, I will learn to keep all these practices untainted by thoughts of the 8 worldly concerns. May I recognize all things as like illusions, and without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. Thus spoke the spiritual master, Lama Tsultrim Dorje Senge. This is completed. Sarva Mangalam. So that last is a kind of a conclusion of the verses. Sarva Mangalam means may all be auspicious, and it is frequently used as an ending like that. Now the Karmapa, he summed this up in his own words. Probably his own words were Tibetan. Here's the translation in English. May we be able to do all these practices untainted by the 8 worldly concerns, and may we be able to do these practices never separated from the view of emptiness, seeing all phenomena as illusions. And we have talked about this view of emptiness in some of the previous books that we have studied. But to begin with, let's talk about the 8 worldly concerns. So leading up to that, these verses show us the path to freedom. Show us the path to liberation from suffering and liberation from samsara. It also shows us how difficult it is to travel the path that leads to liberation, because doing what these verses suggest is extremely difficult. It's difficult enough to see all beings as our equal, much less seeing all beings as being above you. And this is not talking about just keeping that idea in your mind. This is actually behaving that way, thinking that way, and acting that way. It's much easier to give it lip service. So it's good to contemplate that we want freedom from suffering. We want freedom from the suffering that is inherent in samsara. And on top of that, we do not want to leave any one behind. On the other hand, what we really want to do, most likely, is that we want to leave the suffering of samsara, but we want to go to a place that is familiar. When we think that way, we will never arrive there. Because This is not a familiar destination where we are going. It's one that is radically different than our present perception, expectations, and so on and so forth. And so if we really want freedom from the suffering of samsara, we have to be prepared to see things in a different light, to see things fresh and new and to a certain extent unfamiliar, to see things beyond our habitual way of seeing things and perceiving. So that's one point that I wanted to make, that we have to be willing to put up with being somewhat uncomfortable. You could call it bravery. So he goes on to mention that there are many ways in this life that have nothing to do with the Dharma that can be beneficial in terms of the material world, the way things appear. And it's the same way with benefiting others, that Dharma is more concerned with the long-term outlook, with how this affects our future lives and how what we do for others affect their future lives. And this, as he points out, can be problematical to a lot of people. That a lot of people don't feel that they will have a future life or future lives in the plural. And quite honestly, if you don't feel that what you do now will affect you in a future life, there's not a whole lot of point of studying Dharma, practicing Dharma, other than perhaps to reduce stress and so forth. If there's no future, if you're not going to be reborn in the future, if when you die, then what is the point of paying attention to the law of karma? Because when you die, you'll be free of any karma that you have accumulated. So this is something to contemplate, how you feel about the possibility of your rebirth, how confident are you that you will be reborn? How confident are you that what you do will affect your future rebirth, and so forth? Now, we just read a book by Mingyur Rinpoche where he talked about his own experience of dying and then coming back to his body and you might say reanimating the body and then going to the hospital, and the hospital took care of him and he went on with life, and among other things continues to teach and wrote this book that we studied. So it's good to contemplate that your mind, your awareness is what we're talking about here, not your brain. Your awareness will last beyond death. And you might want to think about the reasons for believing that your mind will continue beyond death. The Buddha taught this, and there are many great Buddhist masters that have taught this. Gyalwang Karmapa, the present one, the 17th Karmapa, is the 17th physical emanation of the Karmapas, that all of them have been identified as being Karmapa, which is the same consciousness, the same mind. Is this true, or is this marketing? Is it just a convenient way to inspire people? And think about this, really think about this, not just accept it. If it is true, then will you be reborn, or just these great masters are reborn, have the ability to be reborn? So really think about these things, come to a conclusion, but don't just parrot something that you have heard me say or read or heard other people say. This is not the subject to just kind of accept it blindly. So the Gyalwang Karmapa talks about there are being three types of individuals in terms of Dharma practitioners. And he said the lesser one is those that want to be free of the lower realms in their next lifetime. They want to avoid being born in the hell realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the animal realm. And he said that today there can be a second part of those that are lesser individuals. And these are individuals that are interested in what's going on in their present life and have little interest in future lives, that they're all very much oriented towards reducing suffering and increasing their happiness in their present life. And they either don't care about future lives or they don't believe there will be future lives. And he feels that this type of person is much more important these days than, let's say, a century ago in Tibet, 2 centuries ago, and so forth. That this is where most people are today, even those that are Buddhist. That the lives of people today are, he says, consumed with the 8 worldly concerns. And they are praise and blame, honor and or fame and obscurity, pleasure, pain, gain, and loss. And these all go contrary to Dharma. One of the slogans from the 7 points of mind training is all blame goes back to the individual. That we cannot blame other people for the problems that we are facing. That we are responsible for these because of, among other things, karma. What we experience in terms of unpleasant circumstances and unpleasant occurrences and so forth is a result of our karma, that we're doing this to ourselves. Yeah, in seeking pleasure and trying to avoid pain, when you just look to the material world, that at best you can put pain off and experience some pleasure, but it's always fleeting. The pleasure does not last. And so it is with gain and loss, fame and obscurity, that these things can consume us, but because samsara is samsara, they can never really be true refuges from suffering. So the Karmapa, and again, in some other books, he has talked at great length about consumerism and materialism and the environment, because these are related, closely related, in fact. But at best, consumerism and materialism will give us some temporary happiness. And eventually, if not sooner, later, that temporary happiness will be gone. The classic example is that it's like drinking salt water, that indulging in the pleasures of samsara is like drinking salt water. And what happens when you drink salt water is that it doesn't really quench your thirst. You want more of it, more and more of it. That when we satisfy our search for happiness, for pleasant circumstances, for any of those, for those 8 worldly concerns, 4 are kind of the ones that we go for, and 4 are the things that we want to avoid. And so when we experience being able to accumulate the things that we want, that we feel are pleasant and so forth, it just makes us addicted to wanting more and more and more. And these material objects and experiences, we have not only responses to the material side of it, but also the emotional side of it too. That we can get very tied up in afflictive emotions when it's related to materialism, accumulating material objects, experiences like vacations and so forth. But there actually is not any freedom there, that this is the material world is guided by our habitual patterns, the way we habitually see things, see the world, what we desire, and so forth. Gyalwang Karmapa talks about advertising. And so here is a long quote. It's as if the advertising has blinded us and we no longer think, or we are no longer thinking or examining what we are buying. We get fixated by the ads. On the one hand, we want to bring benefit and happiness for ourselves in this lifetime, but the advertisements and so on distract us from what is really important. So the ads, they're made by people, many of whom have studied psychology and motivation and so forth in college. Many are highly educated. And on top of that, they will do studies on people, trying to find out what makes them most susceptible to what it is that they are trying to sell, and so forth. In a way, when it comes to advertising, you are up against a very formidable group of people that many are highly educated, trained, and have done things to study what makes a person buy the product that they want them to buy. That these people are trying to control you, trying to control your desire, your purchases, and so forth. And very simply, you can control a person if you can control that person's emotions. And that's what they're trying to do with these ads, is to control you, to convince you to buy whatever it is that they are trying to sell. It's really important to realize that there's no freedom here. It's more manipulation. So another point then goes on to the view of emptiness. That he says towards the end of this chapter, quote, "May we be able to do these practices, never separated from the view of emptiness, seeing all phenomena as illusions." So phenomena, the whole material world, everything that we see, experience, taste, touch, feel, and so forth, all of this ultimately is an illusion. It comes together because of causes and conditions. And when the causes and conditions are gone, then it too disappears. So it's important to keep this in mind, that what we are striving for is really mere appearance. It is not solid. And the idea of they lived happily ever after, of course, is an ending for a fairy tale, not for real life. However, it's very easy to fall into thinking that way. If I just have this product in my home, I will be happy. If I just have this kind of car, I will be happy, and so on down the line. But that isn't the way it works out. A few years ago, I Googled the term curse of the lottery. And there were stories in there about people that had won the lottery and won vast amounts of money, millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. And many of them had crashed and burned, that they did not know how to handle large sums of money wisely. And one story that I remember was about a man who won the lottery. Might have been $100 million that he won, a very vast amount of money. And he started giving his granddaughter, who was, I think, she was definitely a teenager. She may have been 16 at the time, giving her lots and lots of money from time to time, no questions asked. And with all that money, what she did with it was get into drugs. And after a couple of years, she died of a drug overdose. Meanwhile, the man's wife divorced him because of arguments over money, how it's going to be spent, when, and so forth. And he, like many other people who are profiled on this website that I visited, was finding that people were his friends because he had money and because they were hoping to get some of his money, that it was not based on friendship, but more transactional. So it's important to realize that money won't solve our problems. Other people cannot solve our problems, that we have to work on them ourselves. And this book, the title is Finding Genuine Practice. It gives you some genuine practice to do. And so with that, I recommend that you do go over the notes that you have taken of this book and that you study them and practice, genuine practice, practice, practice.